When you hear that tonight will surprise you, the mind instinctively reaches outward. It imagines something dramatic, something sudden, something that breaks the normal flow of life. An unexpected message, a sharp turn, a moment that forces attention. Yet the surprise of this night does not come from disruption. It comes from calm, not from acceleration, but from a subtle slowing. And that is what makes it surprising. You may notice that nothing around you has changed. The same space, the same sounds, the same familiar rhythm of the evening. And yet, something inside you has softened. This softness is not weakness. It is the easing of an inner tension you may not have realized you are carrying. For a long time, part of you has been bracing, anticipating, holding itself ready. Tonight, that readiness loosens. And in that loosening, clarity begins to appear. Surprise is usually associated with shock, a jolt that pulls you out of your expectations. But real surprise often works in the opposite direction. It removes something instead of adding something. It takes away noise rather than introducing chaos. This night surprises you by showing how much effort you have been using just to stay steady. And as that effort drops, you feel lighter without knowing exactly why. Perhaps earlier today, you felt unusually tired, or strangely calm, or slightly detached from the usual urgency. These are not random states. They are signs of readiness. Not readiness to act, but readiness to see. When resistance fades, perception widens. And when perception widens, things that were always present suddenly make sense. This is not revelation in the cinematic sense. It is recognition. The surprise of this night does not bring new information into your life. It changes how existing information lands within you. Something that once felt heavy no longer presses as hard. A thought that used to trigger tension passes through with less impact. You are still aware of the same realities, but they no longer define you in the same way. That shift is quiet, but unmistakable. You might find yourself thinking, nothing happened, yet something feels different. That sentence holds the essence of this night, because the most lasting changes rarely announce themselves. They settle in gently, without demanding proof or reaction. This kind of surprise does not ask you to respond. It simply asks you to notice. Expectation is often the greatest barrier to insight. When you are waiting for something to happen, you are less available to what already is. Tonight, expectation steps aside, not because you forced it to, but because it grew tired. In that gap, awareness enters naturally. And awareness, when it arrives without pressure, feels like relief. You may realize that a fear you have been carrying no longer sits at the center of your inner world. It has not disappeared, but it has lost authority. It no longer dictates your emotional posture. This realization does not feel triumphant. It feels normal, as if this was always the way it was meant to be, and you are only now returning to it. This night does not push you toward decisions or action. It does not demand change. Instead, it allows you to rest inside yourself more comfortably. Real clarity does not rush. Urgency belongs to confusion. Understanding slows things down. And in that slowing, you recognize how much strength there is in simply being present. From the outside, the night looks ordinary, but inside, a quiet threshold has been crossed. No alarm sounded. No clear marker announced the moment. Yet you know something has shifted, because what once held you tightly now feels looser, and what once felt distant now feels closer. This is the nature of the surprise you are experiencing. It does not overwhelm you. It steadies you. It does not pull you into the future or push you away from the past. It brings you into a more honest relationship with the present moment, and that honesty feels calm. At this first stage, there is nothing you need to do with what you feel. You do not need to define it or explain it. You do not need to make it bigger or smaller. Allowing it to exist is enough, because this surprise is not trying to impress you. It is simply meeting you where you already are, and that is why it matters. The most surprising nights are not the ones that change your life overnight. They are the ones that change how you experience your life from this point forward, quietly, naturally, without force. As the night continues, the reason it feels different becomes clearer. Nothing external has shifted. The world has not rearranged itself. Conversations, responsibilities, and circumstances remain as they were. Yet inside you, something has quietly moved into place. This is not the result of effort or intention. It feels more like a preparation that completed itself without asking for permission. Readiness is often misunderstood. You may think being ready means feeling confident, energized, or decisive. But the readiness of this night is quieter than that. It is the moment when you stop pushing, when the inner pressure to manage everything eases. You realize you no longer need to hold yourself so tightly together, and in that release, a deeper stability appears. You begin to see that what exhausted you was not life itself, but the way you were bracing against it. The constant alertness, the subtle tension of trying to prevent outcomes, control reactions, or stay ahead of uncertainty. Tonight, that tension loosens, and instead of falling apart, you feel more whole. This is surprising, because for a long time you believed tension was what kept you safe. The shift does not arrive as a decision. You do not tell yourself to relax. Relaxation simply happens. A familiar concern may arise, but it no longer grips you in the same way. The thought is still there, but its weight has changed. It passes through rather than settling in. This is not avoidance. It is perspective. You begin to understand that readiness is not about being prepared for something new. It is about no longer being at war with what already exists. The night feels different because resistance has quietly stepped aside. And when resistance ends, perception opens. Things look the same, but they feel different. Less charged, less urgent. In this state, the mind stops asking large questions. What comes next fades into the background. In its place, a simpler sense appears. This moment is enough. That sense does not feel passive. It feels grounded, as if you are standing on something solid instead of constantly reaching for the next step. You may notice that a familiar trigger no longer produces the same reaction. A memory arises, but it does not pull you under. A possibility crosses your mind, but it does not demand immediate resolution. This is not control returning. It is the need for control dissolving. And there is a difference. Control is tense. Trust is spacious. Your inner voice also begins to soften. The way you speak to yourself loses some of its sharp edges. There is less judgment, less urgency, less pressure to perform or resolve. This gentler tone is not something you practiced. It emerged because the struggle underneath it has eased. The mind is no longer trying to outrun itself. Timing plays an important role here. During the day, the constant demands on your attention make this kind of awareness difficult. The mind stays reactive, moving from one signal to the next. At night, fatigue lowers those defenses. What seemed like weakness becomes an opening. Tiredness becomes a doorway rather than an obstacle. What enters through that doorway is not a grand revelation. It is a small, steady clarity. A sense that not everything needs to be decided tonight. Not everything needs to be solved. And that this is not a failure, but a form of wisdom. The clarity does not answer every question. It simply removes the feeling of being lost. At this point, surprise no longer feels like excitement. It feels familiar, almost intimate. As if you have met something you already knew, but had not fully trusted. That familiarity brings calm. And calm changes your relationship with time. You stop feeling chased by it. The night feels slower, but not empty. You do not feel compelled to change anything right now, because something has already changed, quietly, internally. The shift may be invisible from the outside, but it is undeniable within you. A sense of heaviness has lifted, even if you cannot pinpoint when it happened. This readiness does not promise that tomorrow will look different. It offers something more subtle and more durable. The sense that even if tomorrow looks the same, you will not meet it in the same way. And that difference matters more than any dramatic event. This is why the night feels surprising. Not because something appeared, but because something loosened. And as it loosened, you became more present inside your own life. Without effort. Without force. Simply because the moment allowed it. By the time you reach this phase of the night, you can sense more clearly what the surprise is not. It is not asking you to become someone else. It is not demanding a new identity, a bold declaration, or a complete transformation. Instead, it is quietly releasing you from something you have been carrying for a long time. What lifts is not responsibility itself, but the fear that once held responsibility in place. The real shift happens in how power is experienced. Power no longer feels like effort, endurance, or constant vigilance. It feels like distance. Not distance as avoidance, but distance as clarity. You begin to notice that a thought which once dominated your inner world is no longer at the center. It may still appear, but it no longer drives. That recognition does not arrive with excitement. It arrives with calm certainty. This is where the surprise deepens. You realize that what once controlled you no longer has the same authority. There is no dramatic confrontation, no decisive moment where you defeat it. You simply see it for what it is. And in being seen, it loses its grip. This is not a victory scene. It is a quiet rebalancing. Your relationship with the past also begins to soften. Memories that once pulled you into old emotional patterns still exist, but they do not overwhelm you. You remember without being overtaken. This is not forgetting. It is maturity. The ability to hold memory without being shaped by it. That ability feels steady, not fragile. One of the most surprising realizations of this night is understanding how much of what you believed was protection was actually tension. Worry, control, and constant readiness once felt necessary. They felt like shields. Tonight, that belief loosens. You sense that safety does not come from constant alertness. It comes from knowing you can respond when needed, rather than trying to anticipate everything in advance. This change expresses itself emotionally before it becomes intellectual. Fear may still arise, but it does not linger. Anxiety may appear, but it does not spiral. Thoughts come and go without pulling you into them. This balance does not require effort. It happens because something inside you has settled into its proper place. You also begin to understand that uncertainty itself was never the true problem. The struggle came from treating uncertainty as an enemy. Tonight, that relationship shifts. You stop needing everything to be resolved immediately. You accept that not all answers belong to the present moment. This acceptance brings an unexpected sense of freedom. The surprise does not make you passive. It makes you responsive. You start to feel the difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is rushed and tense. Response is measured and clear. This clarity is not emotional detachment. It is awareness, the ability to choose rather than be driven. You may notice that you do not need to declare, "I am no longer afraid." Instead, a quieter truth settles in. This no longer controls me. That truth does not need reinforcement. It stands on its own. It aligns you with yourself rather than against something else. At this stage, the change no longer feels temporary. You sense that it will carry forward into ordinary moments, into conversations, decisions, pauses, not as a dramatic shift, but as a new baseline. You will recognize it later in small ways, in how quickly you recover, in how lightly you hold things that once felt heavy. This awareness does not pull you backward into reflection or push you forward into anticipation. It anchors you where you are. Presence stops feeling like a concept and starts feeling like a lived experience. You are here, without urgency, without resistance. What becomes clear now is this. The true surprise was never about what the night would bring. It was about how you would meet yourself differently within it. And that meeting is quiet, but quiet does not mean weak. It means stable, because what arrives without noise does not need to leave quickly. It stays, and as it stays, it changes the shape of your inner world in ways that do not require attention, explanation, or effort. As this final stage settles in, you may notice that there is nothing left to complete. The mind often looks for an ending, a clear conclusion, something to label as finished. But what happens now is different. Nothing closes. Nothing is sealed. Instead, tension dissolves on its own. What remains is not emptiness, but ease. A sense that something has found its natural resting place. This surprise no longer occupies your attention. It does not circle in your thoughts, or ask to be understood again and again. It creates space rather than filling it. Within that space, your inner movement feels freer. Thoughts pass through without getting stuck. Emotions rise and fall without demanding explanation. This is how you know the awareness has settled correctly. What lands in the right place does not ask to be managed. You do not feel the need to describe what happened. There is no urge to say that something meaningful occurred. Real shifts rarely announce themselves. They reveal their presence through subtle changes, in the softness of your reactions, in the quiet of your inner dialogue, in the absence of urgency. This is what makes the surprise last. It does not depend on memory or repetition. This state does not make you still or detached from life. It makes you flexible. When you no longer need to defend an inner position, movement becomes natural. You are not withdrawing. You are centered. And from that center, engagement with the world feels simpler, more honest, less reactive. Returning to ordinary moments feels effortless. You can move through the rest of the night as you normally would. Nothing needs to be treated as special. Yet something is different. The sense of rushing is eased. The fear of missing something is quieted. You trust that what belongs to you does not require force to arrive. That trust is not a thought. It is a felt alignment. At this point, the question of what happens next loses its importance. In its place is a calm recognition that this moment is sufficient. This recognition is not passive. It carries quiet strength. The strength of knowing that something inside you is settled, and therefore does not need constant attention. There is no concern that the surprise will fade, because nothing came from outside. What arrived was recognition. And recognition does not disappear. It stays with you, not as a sensation you must hold on to, but as a new way of standing within yourself. When needed, it becomes apparent again. Otherwise, it rests quietly. You may realize now that what comes without struggle remains without struggle. Anything that requires force must be maintained by force. This experience asked nothing of you. It placed no responsibility on your shoulders. It simply adjusted something that was already ready to shift. Over time, that adjustment will show itself in how you choose, how you respond, how you pause. There is no final statement required here. If you feel calm, the process has completed itself. If you do not, nothing is wrong. This kind of awareness does not hurry. It does not pressure. It settles when you are ready, and it waits patiently when you are not. The rest of the night is yours. You do not need to mark it or define it. Ordinary moments are enough, because the purpose of this surprise was never to pull you out of life, but to help you rest more fully inside it, quietly, naturally, enduringly. And in recognizing that, you may see that you have already received what you were meant to receive, without effort, without spectacle, simply because you were present when it arrived.